Hello, Micah Rice from the Columbian here with Meg Wochnick. And you can see we have something different for this episode of Varsity360. It is our first in the First Pacific Financial Studio here. They've been a great partner, allowing us to use some upgraded equipment and a nice setting to talk about high school sports in the area. So big thanks to First Pacific Financial for partnering with us. But Meg, can you believe it? We are already more than halfway through the high school football regular season.
I mean, every year it gets faster and faster, I swear. Instead of looking ahead, we're going to focus on what has been the last 5 weeks of high school football.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting season so far, a little bit unpredictable, lots of drama and storylines. And so what we're going to do here today is we're going to give out some A grades. Yeah, it might seem a little for a midterm exam already, but that's what we're going to do for some teams that have really exceeded our expectations. We're going to look at possibly an early season MVP candidate and what he's done to really lift his team. We're going to look at some coaches that could be, coaches of the year in their respective leagues that have really elevated their team. We're going to look at a player who, if you're a fan of high school football and especially of offense, that you have to make a point to go and see this guy play. And then we're going to look at a couple of teams that are really counting on a big second half of the season to reach their goals of making the postseason. But let's get right into those A grades. Yep. Meg, what teams are you handing out an A for early?
Yeah. So, if I was an educator, I would be one of those teachers that every student would want to have, because I would just be handing out A's all over the place. So no surprise here. If you're undefeated, you're getting an A. And so there are 5 teams that have an undefeated 5-0 record. Skyview, Battleground, Hudson's Bay, Seton Catholic, and La Center. All 5-0, all have really different paths on how they got there. Some we kind of expected that would be there, 5-0 at this point in the season, but some kind of were flying under the radar, and some are, quite frankly, we didn't expect to be 5-0 at this point. So let's start with the 4A. Skyview, let's face it, we thought that they would be undefeated at this point, especially I did. I thought that they would be looking at their schedule, and given that the experience on both sides of the ball, I thought they would be, and sure enough, after 5 weeks, they are. But on the flip side, you look at Battleground, and this is the team that we said at the top of this season debut of this show that this is an experienced group with 22 seniors, that it was going to be kind of a different looked offense of Battleground, but we didn't think that they may be 5-0. And so this is basically a surprise start for Battleground at the halfway point. But it's good to see Battleground and Skyview at 4A being both 5-0.
Shout out to you for naming in the first episode of this season, Battleground is your sleeper team. I took a different team with my prediction, but you nailed that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So that was something, looking across a number of teams, I thought, boy, this is the second year under Mike Woodward. This is a guy, no matter what team he's taken, no matter what program, he really gets the ball rolling. And I thought this year 2 under Woody, this is going to take a big stride. So hopefully we can see if the Tigers keep it going. Next up is Hudson's Bay. This is a program that we talked last week's show that kind of a bit of a surprise. We took our lumps last week talking about we thought they would finish 7th in the 2A Greater St. Helens League. Obviously, the league season is nowhere finished, but here they are, undefeated after 5 weeks and really rolling, and really the surprise of the league season so far in 2A.
Well, I think Hudson's Bay is a perfect example of why it really pays to see a team in action and not just go off prospectuses or kind of what coaches say about their teams before. Because when you see Hudson's Bay play, you just realize how effective that group of linemen is. And it allows them to just, whenever they need 5 or 6 yards on a given play, they just go straight forward, hand it to their, duo of talented running backs, working a few other good athletes in there to pop a big play every now and then. I talked with their coaches before their last win, and it was really just about doing what they do well, and that's running the ball.
I love the power game, the power football game from 15, 20 years ago when that was all high school football really was. So shout out to the Eagles for being being 5-0 at this point. And then you look down at the two 1A teams that are 5-0 at this point. La Center, no surprise, John Lambert's team tend to be 5-0 usually at this point of the season, but they're doing it with a little bit of different personnel. Their quarterback, Garrett Manu, went out with a broken collarbone, their week 3 game, and now Houston Coyle has taken over the starting quarterback role. Last week was his second consecutive starting role, and it's still been the same mojo with the Wildcats. But what's been different now in the 1As is Seton Catholic. Mm-hmm. There's been a number of firsts with this program. First time they've been 5-0. 2 weeks ago is the first time they've scored 59 points in a game. It's the first time that they've had a large scoring margin of victory when they beat Stevenson 59-0. So we're starting to see a number of firsts with the Seton Catholic team. And you got to remember, this is the team that only has 2 seniors, and the majority of their playmakers are only freshmen and sophomores. So this is not going to be the kind of the one and done Seton Catholic team that maybe some people are used to seeing. Yeah,
I mean, they're throwing down a marker. Not only is it going to make their game against La Center later this year must-see high school football action, but previous years, I mean, La Center's always there, but it's been Castle Rock that's kind of been in that second seed. It comes down to the end, and it's the Rockets and the Wildcats, one game for the league title. Now Seton Catholic is saying, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be year after year contenders. And with the young talent that they have and sort of the consistency that they've shown earlier in the season, that's been really impressive.
Yeah, and both La Center and Seton Catholic are on a crash course to still being undefeated when they face off in week 7.
Yeah, well, those are the A grades we're giving out. Obviously, if you score 100% on all your exams like these undefeated teams have, you're going to get an A. But one player that has really led his team to that undefeated start and is turning a lot of heads is the quarterback at Skyview, Jake Kennedy. I got to think that he is in some talks about getting some chatter for being the 4A Greater St. Helens League Player of the Year. And I think we'd agree that he's our first half MVP.
No question. He was the co-offensive league MVP last year. And when looking at the numbers, really, this was no question for me for being the first half league MVP, leading Skyview to a 5-0 mark. And you got to remember, he hasn't played. There's been a couple of games where he hasn't played a full game because he hasn't needed to, because Skyview has played so well that it's been a running clock in a number of games, including last week's 59-0 win over Heritage. In fact, he was a perfect 12 of 12 passing in that game before leaving because of the running clock mercy rule. So I think what's impressed me most about Jake, in fact, it was their 21-7 victory over Bothell a couple weeks ago, a game that I was at, this was a 0-0 game at halftime, and Bothell scores first, and all of a sudden he orchestrated drives, not only with the passing game, but he was doing it with his legs. And that's what impressed me most, really being that dual threat quarterback that he is.
Well, yeah, you look at Skyview's resume, obviously you can get some teams that, well, they're 5-0, but who have they played? Well, 3 of Skyview's 5 opponents are legitimate, and
yes,
they passed all of those tests, I think, with flying colors.
Absolutely, no question. And it's only going to get tougher. They play Kentwood this Saturday, but all of a sudden, look who they open league play with, Camas on the road. That's going to be an absolutely fantastic game to open league play. I can't wait.
Those games in recent years, going back to the COVID spring 2021 season, and then last year where Camas had to rally in the fourth quarter, those games have been absolute wars. If we had to pick one game before this season that is, pick one game on the calendar, drop everything, make sure you get to it, it's that Camas versus Skyview game. Can Skyview finally get past the Papermakers, or do the Papermakers say, it's still our league?
It is. And what is it? 11 straight wins in a row for Camas. And last year, what did Skyview have? A 17-point lead with the ball before that furious comeback by Skyview, by Camas at Kiggins Bowl. And this game in 2 weeks is going to be at Doc Harris, and it's going to be a fantastic game.
Yeah, get there early for that.
Yes.
Because that's going to be, if you show up a few minutes before kickoff, you're probably going to be standing behind the track. So definitely a high point of this season. We talk about a player who's really exceeded expectations, but how about 2 coaches? obviously you got to get it done when you're on the field making plays, but it's the guys on the sideline with the headsets that put those kids in positions to succeed. Who has really impressed you as far as exceeding expectations from the coaching staff?
Yeah, not only is it the head coaches, but also it's just the staffs as a whole. And I mentioned both of these programs, but it's got to be the coaching staffs of both Hudson's Bay and Battleground. So the head coaches, Mike Woodward at Battleground and Mark Oliveria at Hudson's Bay, those head coaches and their staffs, both in their second years at those programs, just an absolutely fantastic job. We spoke a couple minutes ago just what those programs have done this year, both 5-0, just absolutely fantastic. You got to look back at the recent history of both of those programs under previous coaching regimes, and those programs have struggled. They really have. I know Mark Oliveria, the previous regime under him, he took Bay to the postseason, and I know Battleground has previously struggled, and it's great to see both of those programs that have struggled really having this early success, and we hope that it's really not just an early success thing, that it's sustained throughout the rest of the season.
Well, you see with programs that have traditionally struggled like Bay and Battleground have during stretches that their numbers never quite match up. That's not the case this year. You look at the roster, Hudson's Bay has one of the largest rosters in the 2A Greater St. Helens League. They probably have 60 kids on the sideline. I'm just sort of making a neighborhood guess, but definitely more kids out than they have in the past. Same with Battleground. They have the tools to, not have too many guys go both ways, although they do. Some of their best athletes do go, especially Jacob Champagne, both ways. But I want to highlight the coaching staffs a little bit more, especially at Battleground with Mike Woodward. When he was at Woodland, it was more of a pass first, air it out thing that he wanted to do. He looked at the personnel that he had at Battleground and say, that doesn't really fit. But what we can do is give it to our running backs, get behind that physical offensive line, and then rely on our defense, especially the core of linebackers that they have that are both experienced, fast, and strong. He tweaked the game plan to match his personnel, and it's paying off excellently.
I don't think from if you haven't seen Battleground play, the best way I can describe it is kind of this shotgun wing T offense that they run primarily behind Jacob Champagne being the primary ball carrier. I'm not sure I would have seen the success this early with this offense. And I mentioned about both head coaches being in the second years of their program. Coaches, talk about the instilling culture in their programs. And that takes a couple of years, right? It doesn't come just automatically. And again, both of them are in their second years in the program. And look how much these kids, they talk about buying in and establishing culture and getting these kids to understand, buying into what these coaches are instilling into their programs. And we're already in year two, and not even fully in year two. It's really only a year and a half.
Yeah, and you see the same thing at Hudson's Bay, the buying in. Yeah. And it's a similar thing where Coach Mark Oliverio and his staff, they're playing to their strengths. They have a tandem of running backs that can break plays at any time with Akil and Raphael Bauman, the two brothers there. But it's really about the line play with them. But when you talk about a coaching staff, Mark Oliverio might have maybe the most combined experience as far as people on his staff that have been head coaches. You have Rick Steele on that staff. You have Ray Lyons on that staff. And so you basically have three head coaches, but they work in tandem so well that it's not like, see who has the loudest voice and the biggest ego. It's like Ray Lyons does the defense. He comes up with the schemes, an excellent scheme that worked last week against Mark Morris that I saw. Rick Steele with his, decades of experience and state title pedigree that he had at Hawkinson. And then Mark Oliverio is like the conductor that makes all the parts work together.
Yes, absolutely. And it's working flawlessly, not only at Bay, but at Battleground also.
Yeah. Speaking of, maybe another MVP candidate, but in a smaller league, one player that I think if you're a fan of high school football and especially offense, that you have to see is the fast and dynamic running back they have at Woodland, Elijah Anderson. What have you seen from him that makes him such an impactful player this year?
Yeah, this is a kid that I mentioned on this show previously, and you know, I call him kind of this Mr. Must-See guy. You know, if there's one kid that you want to go see in Clark County, this is it. This is a kid who plays 5 or 6 different positions. He doesn't basically leave the field. I'm convinced that he does everything but drive the bus to the away games. He plays safety, corner, tailback. He takes snaps under center at Wildcat. He plays both slot and wideout at the receiver positions. He does just about everything. Last week against Hawkinson was his second game this season where he's had triple-digit numbers, not only in rushing, but also in receiving yards. And if that's not impressive as far as stat-wise, I don't know what is. And so when he has the ball in his hands, whether it's offense, defense, special teams, it is really something special. And when he goes, Woodland goes. And we've seen that, especially in the win column with the Beavers.
Well, I think he really kind of put people on notice around the league and around the county with his performance in their win against Washougal, a win that a lot of people didn't see coming against the reigning league champions, and in a lot of cases, the preseason pick to win that league, Washougal. You know, Elijah Anderson, basically, you know, he put that team on his back, got it into a shootout, and the next thing you know, the Beavers knock off the Panthers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all of a sudden, it is created, and that was basically that victory set into motion what has turned into a league that we discussed last week, complete chaos, complete parity, and now we don't know which direction is up in that league.
Well, that's a perfect segue into our final segment here. Teams that really need a big second half to reach their preseason goals. We have 2 defending league champions that right now, if the season ended, would not make the playoffs. And one of those is Washougal. A little bit surprising that they're 1-2 in league play.
It is. So this is a team not only lost to Woodland a couple of weeks ago at home, but also dropped a 10-point loss last week to Richfield at home. And this is a team that all of a sudden this week plays undefeated Hudson's Bay. Mm-hmm. And if they're in high school football, if there's a week and a game and an opponent that's a must win, this is it. You cannot have a 3-loss be a 3-loss team with 3 weeks to go. And basically this is what's going to happen if you're Washougal, because then you're at the mercy of everybody else in your league, because all of a sudden you're basically begging them to dictate whether or not you're going to be in the postseason. You want to dictate your own path to the postseason. And so if you're Washougal, this is a must-win victory on the schedule.
Well, I think the onus for the Panthers really goes on their defense. Mm-hmm. They kind of got blitzed by Ridgefield falling in a hole early and had to rally, but to make it a close game. But if you're the Panthers, you really are hoping for a shutdown defensive performance this week against Hudson's Bay. It's something you need, not only the win, but the way you win, I think, to reinforce that you can play that kind of championship caliber defense.
Agree. And the thing about this game is it's going to be completely contrasting style of offenses and defense, really. You know, like we've said about Hudson's Bay, this is really a run-heavy style defense. This is going to be really a battle of the trenches as well. And we're going to see really who comes out on top at Kiggins Bowl on Friday night.
Another team that, you know, reigning league champion, but is in a little bit of a hole to start off the season in the 3A Greater St. Helens League is Kelso. Everybody kind of is looking at the games against Mountain View and Evergreen as the ones that are going to decide who eventually advances to the postseason from that league. But Kelso, you know, they drop a last-second loss to Prairie last week on a field goal, and that really sets them up with no margin for error as they go forward with games still against Mountain View and Evergreen. Evergreen being a lot of people's preseason favorite in that league, but Mountain View, the team that's been most impressive in the 3A Greater St. Helens League so far.
Absolutely. Not only what was an 0-1 record for Kelso surprising, but just the fact that Kelso is 1-4. Kelso hasn't been a 1-4 record through 5 games since starting 0-4 in 2013, and that was Steve Amrine's first year at Kelso. And actually, that team went 3-7 and actually made the postseason that year, winning 3 games, going 3-2 in that year, advancing to the Week 10 postseason. So this is a team that's a little bit surprising, and this is by far a team that has still a lot of all-league experience coming back. You got the all-league first-team returning quarterback. You got an Oregon State-bound left tackle, and it's just a little surprising to see a team struggling so far the first 5 weeks of the season.
Well, I think if you were to make the case, the most positive case for Kelso, you could say that their non-league schedule was pretty tough. They played Camas. Did they go up to Tumwater? They did.
They got shut out. Yep.
Yeah, but the loss against Prairie, that I think raises some alarm bells, because Prairie had come in having not won yet this year, and just for it to be a league contest and starting suddenly in 0-1 hole, your back is going to be against the wall every week. And so I think for Kelso, that's where they find themselves. They find themselves in we can't afford to drop another game in this league.
No, especially you got to remember there's only still 2 playoff berths out of the 3A. As unfair as it is, there's only still 2 coming out of the 3A league.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been a wild first half of the season. I mean, if that doesn't get you psyched for the second half of the season, I don't know what will, because we've got unpredictability. We've got teams that have shown that they can possibly contend for, a state semifinal spot, if not more. We can't wait to see how it unfolds. And it all begins this Friday with some Week 6 matchups. And we are almost there into the stretch run of the season. As always, follow us on 360preps.com, and we'll see you next week.